The Ashworth ballroom glittered like a jewel box turned inside out, every surface reflecting candlelight until the entire space seemed to pulse with golden warmth. Crystal chandeliers hung heavy overhead, their teardrops catching and scattering light across the faces of London's finest, faces painted with careful smiles, eyes sharp with calculation beneath the veneer of civility. Catherine Beaumont stood at the edge of it all, as she always did. Kit, as her father had called her since childhood, before titles and propriety had tried to sand away every rough edge, watched the dancers swirl past in their elaborate formations. The music swelled, a waltz that made her chest ache with a longing she'd learned to swallow down like bitter medicine. 28 years old, 28 years of being the Earl's daughter who never quite fit, never quite shone, never quite inspired the sort of breathless interest that secured proposals. She'd stopped expecting them 3 seasons ago. "Lady Catherine, you look positively radiant this evening," Lady Hartwell said as she swept past, her tone suggesting Kit looked anything but. The older woman's eyes barely touched Kit's face before moving on to more interesting prospects. "Thank you, Lady Hartwell," Kit murmured to the woman's retreating back. The pale blue silk of her gown, last season's fashion carefully altered by her lady's maid to appear current, whispered against her legs as she moved further into the shadows. She'd mastered this dance too, the art of being present but invisible, of existing in spaces without taking up too much room. Her brown hair, neither fashionably blonde nor dramatically dark, was pinned in a simple arrangement. Her features were pleasant, her father's words, which meant unremarkable by society's standards. But Catherine Beaumont had something that her years of social invisibility hadn't managed to extinguish. She noticed things. While other ladies watched the dancers, Kit watched the people watching the dancers. While conversations flowed around her like water around a stone, she absorbed the undercurrents, the tensions, the secrets that people thought their smiles concealed. And tonight, she'd noticed something that made her stomach turn. Across the ballroom, Lady Octavia Wren held court like a queen among her subjects. The future Duchess of Stormholt was everything Kit was not. Blonde hair that caught light like spun gold, blue eyes that could freeze or inflame at will, a figure that made men stumble over their words and women over their envy. Her engagement to the Duke of Stormholt had been announced 3 weeks ago, and London society had collectively sighed with satisfaction. Their perfect match. Beauty, breeding, and wealth united. Kit had watched Lady Octavia throughout the evening, had seen the calculated charm she deployed on everyone except her fiancé. The Duke of Stormholt stood near the windows now, his tall frame rigid, with the sort of perfect posture that spoke of military training. Tristan Redwyke, Duke of Stormholt, was perhaps 32, with dark hair and darker eyes that seemed to assess everything they touched. He was handsome in a severe way, all sharp angles and controlled power, but there was something about him that made Kit think of lonely places, of men who'd learned to carry burdens alone. He deserved better than what was about to happen to him. Kit had overheard Lady Octavia in the retiring room an hour ago. The conversation had been whispered, hurried, between Octavia and her companion, Miss Fairchild, but Kit, seated behind a dressing screen as she'd pinned up a torn hem, had heard every word. "Tonight, then. The rose garden near the fountain. Jasper will wait until midnight." "Octavia, this is madness. If anyone sees—" "No one will see. Everyone will be watching the midnight supper announcement. And if they do, I'll simply say I needed air. Lord Loxley is hardly scandalous company. But your engagement is a cage, darling. A gilded one, certainly, but a cage nonetheless. I'll marry Stormholt for his title and his fortune, but I'll take my pleasures where I find them. Jasper understands what I need. The Duke, well, he understands duty. We'll all get what we want." Kit's hands had stilled on her hem. Lord Jasper Loxley. She knew of him, a third son with a rakish reputation and debts that exceeded his charm. And Lady Octavia intended to meet him tonight, while her fiancé stood mere rooms away, believing himself on the verge of a respectable marriage. The practical part of Kit's mind, the part that had learned through painful experience to keep quiet, to mind her own affairs, to let the beautiful people make their beautiful mistakes, had whispered, "This is not your concern. Stay silent. Stay safe." But there was another part of Kit, stubbornly alive despite everything, The part that had gotten her into trouble as a child, that had made her defend servants against unfair treatment, that had once confronted her own brother about his cruelty to a stable boy. That part of her couldn't abide injustice, couldn't watch good people be made fools of, couldn't stay silent when silence meant complicity. Sometimes she thought that perhaps staying silent would have served her better. Perhaps if she'd learned to bite her tongue, to ignore the wrongs around her, she might have secured a husband by now. Perhaps her honesty was what kept her on the margins. But tonight, watching the Duke standing alone while his fiancée schemed, Kit felt that familiar stirring, part righteousness, part impulse, part absolute inability to turn away from what she knew was wrong. She had to tell him. The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. Approach the Duke of Stormholt, speak to him unbidden, accuse his fiancée of infidelity based on an overheard conversation. It was social suicide. If she was wrong, she'd be ruined. If she was right, she'd still probably be ruined. The messenger rarely fared well. Kit took a deep breath, her fingers twisted in her skirt. Across the room, Lady Octavia laughed at something Lord Winchester said, her hand resting possessively on the Duke's arm. The Duke's expression didn't change, that same controlled, distant politeness. He deserves to know, Kit thought. Even if it costs me everything, he deserves to know the truth. Before she could talk herself out of it, Kit began moving through the crowd. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she wove between clusters of guests, each step bringing her closer to a man so far above her station that speaking to him uninvited was itself a transgression. The Duke stood near the terrace doors now, momentarily alone as Lady Octavia had been drawn away by Lady Somerset. He was looking out at the gardens, his profile sharp against the candlelight. Up close, Kit could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed once against his thigh before stilling, as if he were constantly forcing himself into stillness. She stopped beside him, her courage already fraying. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He didn't acknowledge her presence, though she was certain he'd noticed her approach. Perhaps he thought she'd move along like most people did when they realized they weren't interesting enough to hold noble attention. "Your Grace," Kit said softly, her voice barely audible above the music. He turned then, those dark eyes settling on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Miss Beaumont, Catherine Beaumont. My father is the Earl of Ashmore." The words tumbled out too quickly, nervous and unpolished. She saw recognition flicker in his eyes. He knew the name, if not her face. Her father was respectable, if not particularly influential. Lady Catherine. His tone was polite but distant, waiting for her to state her purpose and depart. This was madness. She should turn around, apologize for the intrusion, disappear back into the shadows where she belonged. Instead, Kit leaned slightly closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "Your fiancé is betraying you. They're coming tonight." The words hung between them like smoke. The Duke's expression didn't change immediately, that same controlled mask. But Kit saw his pupils dilate slightly, saw the muscle jump in his jaw. A long moment passed, the music swelling around them, before he finally spoke. "I beg your pardon?" His tone was dangerous now, cold as winter ice. Kit's hands trembled, but she'd come too far to stop now. Sometimes her inability to stay silent was a curse, but tonight she prayed it might be a blessing. "I overheard Lady Octavia in the retiring room earlier this evening. She was speaking with Miss Fairchild. They planned a meeting tonight at midnight in the rose garden by the fountain, with Lord Locksley." The Duke's eyes hadn't left her face. She couldn't read his expression, couldn't tell if he believed her or if he was already calculating how to have her removed from the premises. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "That is quite an accusation, Lady Catherine." "I know." Kit's voice steadied with conviction. "I know what I'm risking by telling you. I know you don't know me, have no reason to trust me. But I heard what I heard, and I couldn't let you." She faltered, then finished simply, "You deserve better than to be made a fool of, Your Grace." Something shifted in his eyes then, surprise, perhaps, or assessment. He studied her for a long moment, and Kit forced herself to hold his gaze, despite every instinct screaming at her to look away, to apologize, to flee. "They who?" he asked finally. "You said they're coming tonight." Kit's breath caught. He was listening, actually listening. "Your fiancé, Your Grace." Lady Octavia. And I believe you should observe where she goes. Lord Loxley will be involved, I'm certain. I heard her mention his name quite clearly. The Duke glanced across the room to where Lady Octavia now stood, accepting compliments from a circle of admirers. His expression remained unreadable, but Kit saw his hands flex once at his sides. Lord Loxley, he repeated quietly. The Rose Garden. Midnight. Yes, Your Grace. He looked back at Kit, and for the first time she saw something other than cold control in his face, a flicker of calculation, of decision being made. Why are you telling me this, Lady Catherine? What do you gain? The question surprised her. Gain? Nothing, Your Grace. I gain nothing. I couldn't stand by and say nothing. It isn't right. Most people would consider it unwise to involve themselves in the affairs of their betters. The words could have been cruel, but his tone held curiosity rather than rebuke. Kit felt heat rise to her cheeks. Perhaps I am unwise, Your Grace. It wouldn't be the first time someone's accused me of such. I have a terrible habit of speaking when I ought to remain silent. But tonight, she met his eyes again, letting him see the honesty there. Tonight, I thought honesty was more important than wisdom. The Duke continued to study her, and Kit had the unsettling sensation of being truly seen for the first time in years, not assessed for her marriage prospects or dismissed for her lack of beauty, but actually observed, as if he were trying to understand the person beneath the unremarkable exterior. You realize, he said slowly, that if you're wrong, if this is some manner of jest or misunderstanding, your reputation will suffer considerably. I know. And if you're right, you'll have made a powerful enemy in Lady Octavia. She's not known for her forgiveness. I know that too. Then you're either very brave or very foolish, Lady Catherine. Kit managed a small smile despite her racing heart. Perhaps both, Your Grace. For the first time, something that might have been amusement touched the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but a softening. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar control. He inclined his head slightly. Thank you for the warning, Lady Catherine. I shall pay attention to where my fiancée wanders. It was a dismissal, polite but firm. Kit curtsied, deeper than necessary, and turned to go. She'd done what she could. The rest was up to him. Lady Catherine. She turned back. The Duke was watching her with that same intense focus. Your honesty is noted and appreciated. Kit felt warmth bloom in her chest, unexpected and precious. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and retreated into the crowd. Her legs felt weak with the aftermath of fear and relief. She'd done it. She'd spoken the truth. Whether the Duke believed her, whether he'd act on her warning, that was beyond her control now. She found a chair near the wall and sank into it, her hand still trembling slightly. Around her the ball continued, music and laughter and the endless dance of society. But Kit's attention kept drifting to the Duke, who'd returned to his position near the windows. He appeared unchanged, his expression neutral as Lady Octavia rejoined him, sliding her arm through his with proprietary ease. But Kit noticed things, and she noticed the way his gaze occasionally moved to the terrace doors, the way he checked his pocket watch once, twice, the way he seemed to be waiting. The hours crawled toward midnight like wounded creatures. Kit remained in her chair, unable to bring herself to dance or socialize. Her stomach knotted with anxiety. What had she done? What had she set in motion? At 1:45, Lady Octavia whispered something to the Duke and began moving toward the terrace doors. Kit's breath caught. The Duke nodded to whatever excuse his fiancée had offered, but as soon as Octavia disappeared through the doors, he followed, not immediately, but after a careful pause, his movements casual enough that no one watching would think anything amiss. Kit couldn't stop herself. She rose and moved toward the terrace as well, careful to keep her distance, to seem merely interested in fresh air. The night was cool against her flushed skin as she stepped outside. The terrace overlooked the gardens, paths illuminated by torches that cast dancing shadows across manicured hedges. She couldn't see the Duke or Lady Octavia from here, but she knew where they'd be going. The rose garden lay to the east, beyond the main walking paths. Kit moved down the terrace steps, keeping to the shadows, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had no business following, no business being out here at all. But that stubborn part of her, The part that couldn't leave well enough alone pushed her forward. She needed to know, needed to see if she'd been right, if her warning had meant anything. The path to the rose garden was darker, away from the main torches. Kit moved carefully, lifting her skirts to avoid rustling. Ahead she heard voices, low, intimate. She pressed herself against a hedge, hardly daring to breathe. Through the roses she could see the fountain, a marble confection of nymphs and dolphins, and beside it, illuminated by moonlight, stood Lady Octavia Wren in Lord Jasper Locksley's arms. They were kissing with the desperate passion of people who believed themselves unobserved. Locksley's hands were in Octavia's hair, and she was pressed against him in a manner that left absolutely no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Their whispered words carried on the night air. "Can't keep doing this, Octavia. The risk—" "Hush, darling, let me worry about the Duke. By the time we're married, you and I will have all the freedom we need. He'll be busy with his estates, and I'll be busy with you." Her laugh was low, triumphant. "Besides, what can he do? Cry off from our engagement? The scandal would be delicious, but he's far too concerned with propriety. He'll marry me regardless, because that's what men like him do. They honor their commitments even when those commitments no longer serve them." Kit felt sick. The casual cruelty in Octavia's voice, the calculated manipulation, it was worse than she'd imagined. And then another voice cut through the night, cold and precise as a blade. "Is that what you believe, Lady Octavia?" Both figures sprang apart. Octavia's face went white in the moonlight as the Duke of Stormholt stepped into view, emerging from the shadows like an avenging spirit. His expression was carved from ice, his eyes burning with barely controlled fury. "Tristan," Octavia began, her voice climbing toward hysteria. "Don't." The single word cracked like a whip. The Duke's gaze moved to Lord Locksley, who'd gone pale as death. "Lord Locksley, I believe you've overstayed your welcome at this gathering. I suggest you depart." Immediately. Locksley needed no further encouragement. He fled into the darkness like a startled rabbit, leaving Octavia alone to face her fiancé. "Tristan, please, let me explain." Octavia's beautiful face crumpled, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks with practiced ease. "I was confused. He forced himself upon me. Do not compound betrayal with lies." The Duke's voice was terrible in its control. "I heard quite clearly what you said, about your plans for our marriage, about your arrangements. Someone's poisoned you against me." Octavia's tears turned to anger, her voice rising. "Some jealous woman has filled your head with lies." "I heard you with my own ears, Octavia. Saw you with my own eyes. There is no lie here, except the one you've been selling me since we began our courtship." Kit pressed herself flatter against the hedge, feeling like an intruder on something private and terrible. She should leave, should retreat before they noticed her presence. But then Octavia's eyes swept the garden, searching for an escape, a scapegoat, and landed on Kit's hiding place. "You!" Octavia's voice turned shrill with accusation. "Lady Catherine, I should have known. You bitter, jealous creature. You told him lies, didn't you? You wanted him for yourself." Kit froze as both the Duke and Octavia turned toward her hiding place. There was nothing to do but step forward, her chin raised despite the mortification burning through her. "I told His Grace the truth. What you chose to do with that truth was your own decision, Lady Octavia." "Truth?" Octavia's laugh was wild, unhinged. "The truth is, you're a desperate spinster who can't bear to see others happy. You invented this entire scenario because you're so pathetically alone. That's enough." The Duke's voice cut through Octavia's tirade with absolute authority. He turned to Kit, and she braced herself for his anger, for being caught eavesdropping, for involving herself where she didn't belong. Instead, he said quietly, "Thank you, Lady Catherine. Your warning was accurate and timely." Before Kit could respond, Octavia let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. "You're choosing to believe her over me. That nothing, that nobody—" "I'm choosing to believe what I heard and saw with my own faculties," the Duke said, his tone final. "Our engagement is ended, Lady Octavia. You'll receive formal notice tomorrow. I suggest you prepare an explanation for society, as I certainly intend to provide mine, including every detail of tonight's encounter." Octavia's face contorted with rage and fear. The tears were gone now, replaced by pure venom. "You'll regret this, Tristan. both of you. I'll make certain everyone knows what you are, a fool taken in by a conniving spinster. And you," she turned her fury on Kit, "you'll pay for this, Lady Catherine. I promise you that. I'll see to it that you never set foot in decent society again." With that, she gathered her skirts and fled toward the manor, her sobs, real or performed, echoing back through the gardens. Silence settled over the rose garden, broken only by the gentle splash of the fountain. Kit stood frozen, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on her. She'd done it. She'd exposed the truth. But Octavia's threat hung in the air like poison, and Kit knew the woman would make good on her promise. Her already precarious social position had just become catastrophically worse. "Lady Catherine," she looked up to find the Duke watching her, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. She curtsied, formal and proper, despite everything. "Your Grace, I apologize for intruding on such a private moment. I should not have followed." "Yet you did." He stepped closer, and Kit had to resist the urge to retreat. "Why?" She faltered, then decided honesty had brought her this far. "I needed to know. I needed to know if I'd been right, if my warning had mattered. It was foolish, I know, improper, but I've never been particularly skilled at knowing when to stop." To her surprise, the Duke's expression softened slightly. Not quite a smile, but something gentler than the ice he'd shown Octavia. "Your foolishness, as you call it, has saved me from a disastrous marriage. I'm not certain most people would count that as a fault. Lady Octavia will make me pay for it," Kit said quietly. "She's influential, well-connected. When she spreads her version of tonight's events, my reputation will be protected," the Duke interrupted firmly. "By me. Lady Octavia may attempt to spread whatever lies she wishes, but I assure you, Lady Catherine, my word carries considerably more weight than hers. And I will make certain society knows the truth of tonight, that you acted with honor and courage, while my former fiancé acted with deceit and betrayal." Kit felt tears prick her eyes, relief and gratitude and something else she couldn't name. "Thank you, Your Grace. You're very kind." "Kind." He shook his head slightly. "No, Lady Catherine, I'm simply honest, as you were honest with me, at considerable risk to yourself." He paused, studying her in that intense way again. "Most people would have stayed silent, would have let me walk blindly into that marriage. Why didn't you?" Kit thought about all the easy answers she could give, duty, propriety, concern for his well-being, but she'd committed herself to honesty tonight, and she wouldn't abandon it now. "Because I couldn't bear it," she said simply. "I couldn't bear watching someone good be deceived by someone cruel. I've spent my entire life watching injustices unfold around me, and I've learned that staying silent eats away at you from the inside. Perhaps it would have been wiser to say nothing. Perhaps I'd be safer if I'd learned to ignore what I see. But I can't. I simply can't. Even when—" She stopped, aware she was rambling. "Even when?" he prompted gently. "Even when it would serve me better to hold my tongue," she finished. "Sometimes I think I'd be married by now if I'd learned to be quiet. But every time I try, something inside me rebels. Tonight was no different. I saw injustice and I couldn't stay silent, even knowing it might cost me everything." The Duke was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. When he finally spoke, his voice held a note of wonder. "You're remarkable, Lady Catherine." Kit felt heat flood her cheeks. "I'm ordinary, Your Grace. Painfully, obviously ordinary." "No." His certainty was absolute. "You're honest in a world that rewards deception. You're brave in a society that punishes courage. You risked everything tonight for a man you don't even know, with nothing to gain and everything to lose. That's not ordinary, Lady Catherine. That's extraordinary." Kit didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such focused attention, such genuine appreciation. She felt seen in a way she'd never experienced, and it was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. "I should return to the ballroom," she managed, "before my absence is noted." "As should I." The Duke offered his arm, formal and proper. "Shall we return together, Lady Catherine? I believe I owe you a dance, at the very least." Kit stared at his offered arm as if it were a serpent. "Your Grace, you don't— I mean, people will talk if you—" "Let them talk. I've just ended my engagement in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. I suspect people will talk regardless. I'd rather give them something worthwhile to discuss." Hesitantly, Kit placed her hand on his arm. The fabric of his coat was fine beneath her fingers, and she could feel the solid strength of him beneath the elegant tailoring. Together, they walked back through the gardens toward the ballroom, and Kit felt as if she were walking in a dream. The night had started with her standing in the shadows, invisible and alone. It was ending with the Duke of Stormholt at her side, his attention focused entirely on her. She didn't understand it, couldn't process it, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her life had just changed forever, and she hadn't the faintest idea what came next. The scandal broke over London society like a summer thunderstorm, sudden, violent, and impossible to ignore. By noon the following day, every drawing room in Mayfair was buzzing with the news. The Duke of Stormholt had ended his engagement to Lady Octavia Wren. The beautiful, accomplished Lady Octavia, whose marriage to the Duke had been celebrated as the social triumph of the season, had been caught in a compromising position with Lord Jasper Loxley, and the woman who'd exposed it all? Catherine Beaumont, the Earl of Ashmore's unremarkable daughter, whom half of society couldn't recall ever meeting. Kit sat in her father's study, her hands folded in her lap, listening to him pace behind his desk. The Earl of Ashmore was a stout man with thinning grey hair and a perpetual expression of mild bewilderment at the world's refusal to operate according to his expectations. "Explain to me again," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, "how you came to be involved in the Duke of Stormholt's private affairs." "I overheard Lady Octavia discussing her plans, father. I felt duty-bound to inform the Duke." Kit kept her voice calm, though her stomach churned with anxiety. She'd barely slept, had spent the night replaying the garden scene over and over, waiting for the consequences to descend. "Duty-bound," her father repeated flatly. "Catherine, decent young ladies do not involve themselves in scandals. They do not approach dukes unbidden. They do not—" He broke off, pressing his fingers to his temples. "Lady Hartwell sent word this morning that she's withdrawing her invitation to her garden party next week. 3 other hostesses have done the same." Kit's heart sank. So it was beginning. Octavia's revenge, as promised. "I'm sorry, father. I truly am. But I couldn't let the Duke marry that woman knowing what she was. It wasn't right." "Right?" Her father's voice rose. "What's right is minding one's own affairs. What's right is not destroying what little social standing this family maintains. Do you know what people are saying? That you invented the entire scenario because you wanted the Duke for yourself. That you're a desperate spinster who'd stoop to anything for a titled husband." Each word landed like a blow. Kit had known this was coming, but hearing it from her father's lips made it devastatingly real. "That's not true. You know it's not true." "What I know doesn't matter, Catherine. What society believes matters. And right now, thanks to Lady Octavia's version of events, society believes you're a scheming, jealous woman who orchestrated this entire scandal. The Duke knows the truth. He said he'd speak in my defense." Her father's laugh was bitter. "The Duke has his own reputation to manage, Catherine. Men like him don't sacrifice their standing to defend girls like you. He'll distance himself from this entire mess, and you'll be left to bear the consequences alone." The study door opened, and Kit's mother swept in, her face pale with distress. Lady Ashmore was a handsome woman whose beauty had faded into a sort of pinched elegance over the years. "Frederick, Lady Somerset has just cut me in the street. Cut me. As if I were some common—" She noticed Kit, and her expression hardened. "I hope you're satisfied, Catherine. Your father and I have worked for years to maintain this family's position, and you've destroyed it in a single evening." "Mother, I was only trying to help." "Help? You call this helping?" Her mother's voice turned shrill. 3 seasons we've tried to find you a husband, Catherine. 3 seasons of hoping some gentleman would overlook your plainness, your tendency to speak out of turn, your complete lack of feminine grace. And just when I'd thought perhaps we could salvage something from this situation, you go and involve yourself in the scandal of the decade." The words hurt more than they should have. Kit had heard variations of them before. Her mother's disappointment in her unmarried state, her father's frustration with her opinions, society's dismissal of her very existence. But somehow, hearing them now, after last night's strange, glittering moment of being seen by the Duke, they cut deeper. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, meaning it. She was sorry for the pain she'd caused her parents, sorry for the social consequences they'd face. She just wasn't sorry for what she'd done. Her father sighed heavily. "You'll remain at home for the foreseeable future. No balls, no social engagements. We'll weather this storm as best we can, but Catherine—" He looked at her with something like pity. "I fear your prospects were already slim. After this, they're non-existent. You must prepare yourself for permanent spinsterhood." Kit nodded, her throat tight. She'd already accepted that fate years ago, but having it spoken aloud still stung. "Yes, Father. Go to your room. Your mother and I need to discuss how to manage this disaster." Kit rose and left the study, her movements mechanical. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom, a pleasant enough space overlooking the small garden behind their townhouse, and sank onto her bed. She'd known there would be consequences, had accepted them before she ever approached the Duke. But knowing and experiencing were vastly different things. The reality of her situation settled over her like a heavy cloak. Social exile, her family's disappointment, years stretching ahead with no prospect of marriage or change, or anything beyond this small, constrained existence. Was it worth it, she wondered? Was exposing the truth worth all of this? She thought of the Duke's face in the garden, the way he'd looked at Lady Octavia with such cold fury. Thought of the marriage he'd nearly entered, a lifetime of deception and betrayal, all concealed behind social propriety. And she thought of his words to her, "You're extraordinary." Yes, she decided, it had been worth it, even if she paid for it for the rest of her life. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting her lady's maid. Instead, her father appeared, his expression strange, somewhere between bewilderment and cautious hope. "Catherine, you have a visitor." "A visitor?" Kit stood quickly. "Father, if it's Lady Hartwell come to lecture me—" "It's not Lady Hartwell." Her father's voice was odd. "It's the Duke of Stormholt. He's waiting in the drawing room and has asked specifically to speak with you." "With me present, naturally," he added quickly, propriety asserting itself even in crisis. Kit's heart stuttered. "The Duke? Here?" "Apparently. Come along, Catherine. And for heaven's sake, try not to make this situation any worse than it already is." Kit followed her father downstairs in a daze. The Duke of Stormholt was in her family's modest townhouse, asking to see her. Nothing about the past 24 hours made sense, and this latest development only compounded the surreal quality of her new reality. The drawing room was their best room, which meant it was pleasant but distinctly shabby compared to the grand houses where Kit had spent her social seasons. The furniture was good quality but aging, the curtains slightly faded from sunlight, everything speaking of genteel poverty rather than true wealth. And in the middle of this perfectly ordinary room stood the Duke of Stormholt, looking as out of place as a lion in a dovecote. He turned as they entered, his expression serious. He was dressed impeccably in a dark coat and dove-grey waistcoat, every inch the perfect aristocrat. But Kit noticed the shadows under his eyes, suggesting he'd slept as poorly as she had. "Your Grace." Kit curtsied, her mind racing. "This is unexpected. Lady Catherine. Lord Ashmore." The Duke inclined his head to her father. "Thank you for receiving me. I realize my visit is somewhat irregular, but the circumstances warrant a departure from standard protocol." Her father bristled slightly at being addressed in his own home, as if the Duke were doing them a favor. But years of social conditioning kept his response polite. "Of course, Your Grace. Please, sit." They arranged themselves, Kit and her father on the settee, the Duke in the armchair opposite. An awkward silence stretched out. Kit had no idea what to say, couldn't fathom why he was here. The Duke cleared his throat. "I've come to address the situation that arose from last night's events. I understand that Lady Octavia has been spreading a rather creative version of what occurred, one that places Lady Catherine in a decidedly unflattering light." "That's putting it mildly, Your Grace," Kit's father said stiffly. "My daughter has been accused of scheming, lying and manipulating you for her own advancement. Half of London believes she invented the entire scenario. Which is why I'm here." The Duke's voice was firm, certain. "I've spent the morning calling on the most influential members of society. Lady Hartwell, the Duchess of Pemberton, Lord Winchester, among others. I've made certain they understand the truth, that Lady Catherine overheard a conversation, informed me out of genuine concern, and that everything she told me was verified by my own observations. Lady Octavia was indeed meeting Lord Locksley in a compromising manner, and Lady Catherine's warning was both accurate and honourable. Kit felt her breath catch. You spoke to them? In my defence? Of course. The Duke looked at her, as if this should be obvious. You acted with integrity, Lady Catherine. The least I could do was ensure society understood that fact. I will not allow you to suffer consequences for doing what was right. Her father leaned forward. That's very generous, Your Grace. But I'm not certain even your word can overcome Lady Octavia's influence. She's quite popular, and people are inclined to believe her version of events. Lady Octavia's popularity is currently in sharp decline, the Duke said dryly. When I explained to certain key individuals exactly what I witnessed, her embrace with Lord Locksley, her rather callous assessment of our future marriage, the tide of opinion shifted quite dramatically. By this evening, I expect most of society will understand that Lady Catherine is the hero of this situation, not the villain. Kit felt dizzy with relief and disbelief. Your Grace, I don't know what to say. Thank you seems inadequate. Thanks aren't necessary. I'm simply correcting an injustice, much as you did for me. He paused, his gaze holding hers. However, there is one complication remaining. Her father tensed. What complication? The nature of last night's events has created an association between myself and Lady Catherine in society's mind. People are asking questions about our relationship, making assumptions based on the fact that I believed her warning over my fiancé's denials. Some are suggesting that I've developed an attachment to Lady Catherine, or that she and I were somehow complicit in orchestrating the evening's drama. Kit felt her face flame. That's absurd. We barely know each other. I'm aware, but society rarely concerns itself with facts when speculation is more entertaining. The Duke leaned forward slightly, his expression intent. Which brings me to my proposal. Proposal? Her father's voice climbed with alarm. Not that sort of proposal, the Duke said quickly. At least not immediately. What I'm suggesting is this, that Lady Catherine allow me to call upon her, publicly, respectably, with all proper protocols observed. If society believes there's a connection between us, we might as well give them an actual connection to observe. This would serve several purposes. It would further legitimize Lady Catherine's actions as those of a concerned friend, rather than a scheming outsider. It would demonstrate my gratitude for her honesty, and it would provide Lady Catherine with social protection through association with my name. Kit stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. The Duke of Stormholt wanted to call on her, to be seen publicly as her... What? Friend? Suitor? Your Grace, she managed. You don't owe me anything. Certainly not your time or your reputation. I did what I did without expectation of reward. I'm aware, which is precisely why I'm offering. His gaze was steady, sincere. Lady Catherine, you saved me from a disastrous marriage at great personal cost. You demonstrated courage and integrity that I find increasingly rare in society. The least I can do is ensure you don't suffer for your honesty. And frankly, he paused, something shifting in his expression. I find I'd like to know you better. Last night, in those brief moments we spoke, I encountered someone genuine in a world of carefully constructed facades. That's worth pursuing, even setting aside questions of social obligation. Kit's heart was doing strange things in her chest, racing and stuttering and making it hard to breathe. The Duke of Stormholt found her interesting, wanted to know her better. It felt like a dream, impossible and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Her father, however, was more practical. Your Grace, while your offer is extraordinarily generous, I must ask, what are your intentions toward my daughter? If you're simply seeking to repair her reputation temporarily, that's one matter. But if you're suggesting something more permanent, I'm suggesting, the Duke said carefully, that we allow the situation to develop naturally. I won't make promises I'm uncertain I can keep, but I will say this. I have no intention of trifling with Lady Catherine's affections or reputation. My interest is genuine, and my conduct will be entirely honourable. If, over time, our acquaintance develops into something deeper, then we'll address that when it occurs. For now, I'm simply asking permission to call upon your daughter with the understanding that my intentions are serious and respectful. Kit found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Your Grace, I appreciate this more than I can express, but I can't let you feel obligated to me. You don't have to do this." He turned those dark eyes on her, and Kit felt pinned by their intensity. "Lady Catherine, I never do anything out of mere obligation. If I'm offering this, it's because I choose to. The question is, do you choose to accept?" Did she? The sensible part of Kit's mind screamed that this was madness. The Duke was so far above her station, so impossibly out of reach. Even if his intentions were honorable, even if society accepted their association, it couldn't possibly lead anywhere real. He was a duke. She was nobody. But the other part of her, the part that had spoken truth to power last night, that had refused to stay silent despite the cost, that part whispered, what if? What if this impossibility became possible? What if the Duke's interest was genuine? What if, for once in her unremarkable life, something extraordinary happened? "I accept," Kit said, her voice stronger now, "with gratitude and genuine pleasure, Your Grace." Something that was definitely a smile touched his lips, small but real. "Excellent. Then I shall call upon you tomorrow afternoon, if that's agreeable. We'll take a drive through the park, allow society to see us together in a perfectly respectable context." Her father, who'd been watching this exchange with increasing bewilderment, cleared his throat. "Very well, Your Grace. Tomorrow afternoon, then. I assume you'll bring a chaperone." "My aunt, Lady Thornbury, has agreed to accompany us. She's quite proper, I assure you." The arrangements made, the Duke rose. Kit and her father stood as well, the conventions of polite society asserting themselves even in this strangest of circumstances. The Duke paused at the door, looking back at Kit. "Lady Catherine, I meant what I said last night. You're extraordinary. I look forward to our drive tomorrow." And then he was gone, leaving Kit standing in her shabby drawing room, feeling as if the world had tilted on its axis. Her father sank back onto the settee, his expression dazed. "Catherine, do you realize what just happened? The Duke of Stormholt, one of the most eligible men in England, just asked permission to court you." "He didn't say court, father. He said call upon. It's the same thing, dressed in careful language." "Good heavens, Catherine, if this progresses, if he actually means what he implied..." Her father's eyes widened. "You could be a duchess." The words hung in the air, absurd and impossible. Kit, a duchess? The girl who'd spent 3 seasons as a wallflower, who'd accepted her fate as a spinster, who'd never expected anything beyond a quiet existence on the margins. "That's not going to happen," Kit said firmly, though her heart fluttered with dangerous hope. "He's being kind, making amends. Once the scandal dies down, he'll move on to someone more appropriate." Her father stood and placed his hands on her shoulders, an unusual display of affection. "Perhaps, but Catherine, sometimes impossible things happen. Sometimes courage is rewarded. Just try not to lose your heart too quickly, I'd hate to see you hurt." Kit nodded, though she suspected it might already be too late. In one night, the Duke of Stormholt had seen her, truly seen her in a way no one else ever had. He'd defended her, protected her, and now wanted to know her better. How could she not lose her heart to that? The following afternoon, Kit stood before her mirror while her lady's maid, Sarah, fussed with her hair. The dress she'd chosen, a soft dove grey with minimal trimming, was her finest, though it was still obviously inferior to the fashions worn by society's true beauties. "You look lovely, miss," Sarah said, securing a final pin. "That Duke won't know what hit him." Kit managed a shaky smile. "I suspect the Duke knows exactly what he's getting. An ordinary girl who talks too much and causes trouble." "Ordinary?" Sarah snorted. "Miss, if you were ordinary, a Duke wouldn't be calling to take you driving. Now deep breath. You've faced down scandals and threats and Lady Octavia Wren herself. One carriage ride should be simple by comparison." But it wasn't simple. Nothing about this situation was simple. As Kit descended the stairs to the drawing room where her parents waited, she felt her stomach twist with anxiety. What would they talk about? What if she said something foolish? What if society's gossips were right, and the Duke regretted his offer already? The knock at the door came precisely at 2 o'clock. Kit's father answered, and moments later the Duke entered with an elderly woman on his arm. "Lord Ashmore, Lady Catherine, may I present my aunt, Lady Thornbury?" Lady Thornbury was perhaps 70, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She examined Kit with an assessing gaze that would have been intimidating if not for the slight smile playing at her lips. "So you're the girl who caused all the fuss," Lady Thornbury said bluntly. "Saved my nephew from a dreadful marriage, from what I hear. About time someone exposed that Wren girl for what she is." "Aunt Cecilia," the Duke said with what might have been exasperation, though his eyes held warmth. "What? It's true, I never liked her, told you so at the engagement ball. But would you listen?" "No. Had to go and nearly marry the chit anyway." She turned back to Kit. "You, however, appear to have a functioning sense of honor. Refreshing in this day and age. Come along then. Let's get you into the carriage before the gossips completely lose their minds over the wait." Despite her nervousness, Kit found herself smiling. Lady Thornbury was exactly the sort of elderly eccentric she appreciated, direct, honest, and utterly unconcerned with conventional pleasantries. The Duke's carriage was elegant without being ostentatious, a beautifully maintained barouche drawn by matched grey horses. The Duke handed Kit in first, then Lady Thornbury, before taking the seat opposite them. As they rolled into motion, Kit felt hyper-aware of everything: the Duke's proximity, the soft leather of the seats, the way sunlight slanted through the windows. "I thought we'd drive through Hyde Park," the Duke said. "It's the fashionable hour, so we'll be quite visible. That should help establish our association in society's mind." "How calculating," Lady Thornbury observed. "Though not wrong. Nothing like being seen together at the fashionable hour to set tongues wagging in the right direction." Kit smoothed her skirts, trying to appear calm despite her racing heart. "Your Grace, I want to thank you again for what you did yesterday. Speaking to those people on my behalf, it meant more than I can say. You're quite welcome. Though I suspect you'd have weathered the storm regardless. You strike me as remarkably resilient, Lady Catherine." "Resilient," Kit repeated. "That's a kind way of saying stubborn, I think." "Not at all. Stubbornness is inflexibility in the face of reason. Resilience is strength in the face of adversity. There's a considerable difference." Lady Thornbury made a sound that might have been approval. "She has wit, Tristan, that's good. You need someone who can match your tendency toward brooding intensity." "I don't brood," the Duke protested mildly. "You absolutely brood, dear boy. You've been brooding since you returned from the continent. But that's a conversation for another time." She turned to Kit. "Tell me, Lady Catherine, what do you do with your time? Besides exposing fraudulent engagements, I mean." Kit blinked at the abrupt question. I read mostly, and I volunteer at the children's charity on Wednesday afternoons. I enjoy walking, though my mother says I walk too much for a lady. And She hesitated, then decided honesty had served her well so far. "I observe people, I suppose. Watch how they interact, what they reveal without meaning to. It's probably quite odd." "It's not odd at all," the Duke said. "It's perceptive. Most people are so focused on themselves they never truly see others. The ability to observe, to understand what isn't being said, that's a rare gift." Kit felt warmth bloom in her chest at his words. "My mother would disagree. She says my tendency to notice things makes me prone to inappropriate commentary." "Your mother," Lady Thornbury said dryly, "sounds like she has more concern for propriety than substance. Noticing things is hardly a fault, dear girl. It's what you do with what you notice that matters." They entered Hyde Park, and Kit immediately felt the weight of dozens of eyes turning their direction. The fashionable hour was in full swing, carriages and riders filling the paths, society's elite on display. And now she was part of that display, seated in the Duke of Stormholt's carriage for all to see. "They're staring," she murmured, fighting the urge to sink lower in her seat. "Let them stare," the Duke said calmly. "We've done nothing wrong. You acted with honor. I've ended an engagement to a woman who betrayed my trust, and now we're taking a perfectly respectable carriage ride with my aunt as chaperone. Anyone who chooses to make scandal from that says more about themselves than about us." His certainty helped steady Kit's nerves. She sat straighter, meeting the curious stares with as much dignity as she could muster. Lady Hartwell's carriage passed, and Kit saw the woman's eyes widen with surprise before she offered a stiff nod. The Duchess of Pemberton actually smiled and called out a greeting to Lady Thornbury. "You see?" the Duke said quietly. "The tide is already turning." They completed 2 circuits of the park, long enough to be thoroughly observed, but not so long as to appear desperate for attention. The Duke kept up a steady conversation, asking Kit about her childhood, her interests, her thoughts on everything from current politics to the latest novels. Lady Thornbury interjected occasionally, with tart observations that made Kit laugh despite her nervousness. By the time they returned to Kit's townhouse, she felt exhausted but oddly exhilarated. The Duke handed her down from the carriage with perfect propriety, his hand steady beneath hers. "Thank you for the drive, Lady Catherine. I found it most enjoyable." "As did I, Your Grace." Kit meant it. Beneath the social performance, she genuinely enjoyed their conversation. The Duke was intelligent, thoughtful, and surprisingly easy to talk to when he allowed himself to relax. "Might I call upon you again? Perhaps the day after tomorrow? We could walk in your gardens if the weather holds." Kit's heart leapt. "I'd like that very much." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his severe features into something almost boyish. "Excellent. Until then, Lady Catherine." As the carriage rolled away, Kit stood on her doorstep feeling dazed and hopeful and terrified all at once. Inside, her mother was waiting, her face alight with barely contained excitement. "Catherine, how did it go? What did he say? Did anyone see you? What did Lady Thornbury think?" Kit sank into a chair, her mind still whirling. "It went, well, I think. People saw us. Lady Thornbury is wonderful, sharp as a tack, and absolutely terrifying in the best way. And the Duke, Mother, he wants to call again, day after tomorrow." Her mother pressed her hands together, tears gathering in her eyes. "Oh, Catherine. Oh, my dear girl. Do you know what this means?" Kit did. It meant hope. It meant possibility. It meant that her impulsive decision to speak truth might have consequences far beyond anything she'd imagined. It meant her life was changing, irrevocably and wonderfully, and she had no idea where it would lead. But for the first time in years, Catherine Beaumont found herself believing that perhaps, just perhaps, extraordinary things could happen to ordinary girls who were brave enough to speak the truth. 3 weeks passed in a dreamlike haze of carriage rides, chaperoned walks, and carefully orchestrated social appearances. 3 weeks during which Kit watched the impossible, slowly, inexorably, become real. The Duke, Tristan, as he'd finally asked her to call him in private moments, though propriety demanded she maintain Your Grace in public, was unlike anyone she'd ever known. Behind his severe public demeanor lived a man of surprising depth, well-read, with strong opinions about art and politics, possessed of a dry wit that caught her off guard and made her laugh in the most unexpected moments. He listened when she spoke, actually listened as if her thoughts mattered, as if her observations carried weight. He asked her opinion on matters ranging from estate management to social reform, and seemed genuinely interested in her responses. He remembered things, small details she'd mentioned in passing, preferences she'd expressed, stories she'd shared, and slowly, carefully, Kit felt herself falling. It was terrifying. The Duke was being everything proper and courteous, but Kit couldn't forget the vast gulf between their stations. He was a duke, one of the most powerful men in England. She was the daughter of a minor earl with no fortune, no exceptional beauty, no particular accomplishment to recommend her beyond an inconvenient sense of justice and a too-sharp tongue. Yet here they were, seated in her family's small garden on a bright October afternoon, Lady Thornbury dozing on a bench nearby as propriety demanded, discussing philosophy as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "But surely you can't believe that all human behavior is motivated purely by self-interest," Kit argued, gesturing with her teacup for emphasis. "What about sacrifice? What about parents who give everything for their children, or soldiers who die for their comrades?" "Those could still be argued as forms of self-interest," Tristan countered, though his eyes sparkled with the pleasure of debate. "Parents invest in their children's survival because it ensures the continuation of their line. Soldiers form bonds of loyalty that make betrayal feel worse than death. Even altruism serves the self by providing satisfaction, social approval, or the avoidance of guilt." "That's incredibly cynical, Your Grace." "Is it? Or is it simply honest?" He leaned forward slightly. "Consider your own actions the night of the Ashworth Ball. You could argue you acted from pure altruism, but you also acted because staying silent would have conflicted with your sense of justice, would have caused you personal distress. You served yourself by serving me." Kit set down her teacup with a soft click. Are you suggesting I warned you about Lady Octavia out of self-interest? I'm suggesting that human motivations are complex and often serve multiple purposes simultaneously. That doesn't diminish the value of the action. You did the right thing, Lady Catherine. Whether you were also satisfying some internal need doesn't change that fundamental truth. She studied him, noting the way he'd retreated into formality, using her surname instead of her given name, even though they were in her garden. It was something she'd noticed. Whenever their conversations approached anything too personal, too revealing, Tristan withdrew behind proper address and careful distance. "What motivated you to call upon me?" Kit asked suddenly. "After the scandal. You said it wasn't mere obligation, but you've never fully explained what it was." Tristan was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving to the roses climbing the garden wall. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. "You intrigued me, you still do. In a world where everyone wears masks, where every conversation is calculated, every gesture designed to manipulate or impress, you were simply honest, fearlessly so. I found that," he paused, searching for words, "refreshing, essential even, like breathing clean air after years in a smoke-filled room." Kit's breath caught. There was something in his tone, something vulnerable beneath the controlled exterior that made her heart ache. "You're lonely, aren't you? Even surrounded by society, by people vying for your attention, you're desperately lonely." His eyes snapped to hers, wide with surprise that she'd seen through him so clearly. For a moment she thought he might deny it, retreat further into formality. Instead he said quietly, "Yes, I am." The admission hung between them, intimate and heavy. Kit wanted to reach across the space separating them, to take his hand, to offer comfort. But Lady Thornbury was right there, and propriety demanded distance, and Kit couldn't risk overstepping the careful boundaries that governed their interactions. "I understand," she said instead. "I've felt that way my entire adult life, surrounded by people who see only what they expect to see. The plain daughter, the spinster, the woman who exists on the margins, never seen for who I actually am. Until—" She stopped, heat rising to her cheeks. "Until," he prompted gently. "Until you," Kit finished softly. "You see me, Your Grace, and I hope, that perhaps I see you too." Something shifted in Tristan's expression, a crack in that careful control, a glimpse of the man beneath the Duke. He opened his mouth to respond, but Lady Thornbury chose that moment to wake with a tremendous snort. "Good heavens, I wasn't sleeping, just resting my eyes. What are you two discussing with such serious faces?" The elderly woman peered at them shrewdly. "Nothing improper, I trust." "Never, Aunt Cecilia," Tristan said, his tone returning to its usual measured calm. But his eyes, when they met Kit's, held warmth and something else. Promise, perhaps, or possibility. The moment was broken, but Kit found she didn't mind. Something important had just happened, something that shifted the careful dance they'd been performing from mere social obligation toward genuine connection. Lady Thornbury insisted they take a turn about the garden, and as they walked, maintaining proper distance, their steps synchronized, Tristan said quietly, "There's a soiree at Lady Pemberton's tomorrow evening. Would you consent to attend, as my guest?" Kit's pulse quickened. "The soiree, Your Grace, I'm not certain I'm ready for such a public appearance. You've been seen with me repeatedly. Society has accepted our association. This is simply the next step, allowing them to see us in a more formal social setting." He paused. "I'd like you there, Lady Catherine, if you're willing." How could she refuse? Even knowing that accepting meant stepping further into his world, meant exposing herself to greater scrutiny and risk, Kit found herself nodding. "Yes, so I'd be honored to attend." His smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Excellent. I'll call for you at 8. The following evening, Kit stood before her mirror, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at her. Her mother had insisted on bringing in a proper lady's maid to dress her hair in the latest fashion, and had, with tears of joy, presented Kit with a new gown, deep emerald silk that brought out the green flecks in her hazel eyes, cut in the current fashion with a modest but flattering neckline. "You look beautiful, miss," Sarah breathed, "like a proper lady." Kit touched the silk nervously. "I look like someone trying very hard to be something she's not." "Nonsense. You look like exactly what you are, a gentlewoman of quality attending a soiree with a duke. Now chin up. Remember what you told that duke in the garden. He sees you, so let him see you in that gorgeous dress and see if he doesn't fall at your feet." Kit laughed despite her nerves. "I don't think dukes fall at anyone's feet, Sarah. Then he'll be the first to make an exception, mark my words." When Tristan arrived precisely at 8, the expression that crossed his face as Kit descended the stairs made all her mother's fussing worthwhile. For a moment, his careful control slipped entirely, and Kit saw pure, unguarded appreciation in his eyes. "Lady Catherine," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual, "you look—" He seemed to search for an adequate word. "Magnificent." Kit felt heat flood her cheeks. "You're very kind, Your Grace." "I'm very honest." He offered his arm. "Shall we? Lady Pemberton's soirees wait for no one, not even dukes." Lady Thornbury was already in the carriage, and as they set off toward Mayfair, Kit felt her anxiety return. "Your Grace, I should warn you, I'm not particularly accomplished at soiree. I tend to say the wrong thing or laugh too loudly or—" "Be yourself," Tristan interrupted gently. "That's all I ask. Be the woman who was brave enough to tell me the truth when no one else would. That woman doesn't need to perform for anyone." His certainty steadied her. As they arrived at Lady Pemberton's townhouse, a massive edifice that made Kit's family home look like a cottage by comparison, Kit took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. She'd faced Lady Octavia's wrath. She could face a soiree. The entrance hall was ablaze with light, footmen in livery directing guests upward to the main drawing rooms. Kit could hear music drifting down, a string quartet playing something elegant and complex. The scent of hothouse flowers was almost overwhelming. Great arrangements of roses and lilies, placed on every available surface. As they reached the main drawing room, Lady Pemberton herself swept forward to greet them. The Duchess was perhaps 50, handsome rather than beautiful, with keen grey eyes that seemed to catalogue everything at a glance. "Your Grace, Lady Catherine, how delightful you could attend." The Duchess's smile was warm, genuine. "Lady Catherine, I must tell you, I've been hoping to speak with you. What you did at the Ashworth ball, exposing that dreadful Wren girl's true nature, took remarkable courage. We need more women like you in society, my dear. Women with backbones." Kit curtsied, surprised by the warm reception. "Thank you, Your Grace. That's very kind. Not kind. Accurate. Now, come in, both of you. The musicale will begin shortly, but there's time for refreshments. His Grace the Duke of Rothermere is here, Stormholt, and was asking about you. Something about those property borders you were discussing?" As Lady Pemberton drew Tristan away to speak with the other Duke, Lady Thornbury appeared at Kit's elbow. "Well done, dear girl. The Duchess of Pemberton is the most influential hostess in London. Her approval means a great deal." "I didn't do anything," Kit protested. "You were honest and humble and didn't simper. That's quite enough in this company." Lady Thornbury guided her toward a small grouping of chairs. "Now several ladies are dying to meet you. Shall we get the interrogation over with?" Kit found herself surrounded by some of society's most prominent women. Lady Winchester, the Marchioness of Hartwell, Lady Somerset. The same women whose approval she desperately sought during her failed seasons. And now they were looking at her with curiosity and respect. "Lady Catherine, you must tell us," Lady Winchester said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "How did you recognize that Lady Octavia was playing the Duke false? Were there signs we all missed?" Kit hesitated, uncertain how much to share. "I simply overheard a conversation, my lady. I wasn't seeking to uncover anything. It was pure happenstance." "But you chose to act on what you heard," Lady Somerset interjected. "Most would have stayed silent, unwilling to risk involvement." "You were brave, or foolish," Kit said with a small smile. The distinction was unclear at the time. The ladies laughed, and Kit felt some of her tension ease. They spoke for several minutes about inconsequential matters: fashion, the upcoming season, mutual acquaintances. Kit participated carefully, mindful of not saying too much, of maintaining the proper level of interest without appearing over-eager. Across the room, she caught Tristan's eye. He was deep in conversation with Duke Rothermere, but something in his expression softened when he looked at her. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but Kit felt it like warmth spreading through her chest. Lady Hartwell followed her gaze and smiled knowingly. "The Duke seems quite taken with you, Lady Catherine. I don't believe I've ever seen him so attentive to any lady. Not even Lady Octavia commanded such focused regard." "We're simply friends, my lady," Kit said quickly, though her heart raced at the implication. "Friends?" Lady Winchester repeated with gentle amusement. "Yes, that's certainly one word for it. My dear, the Duke of Stormholt has been one of London's most eligible bachelors for the better part of a decade. In all that time, he's shown genuine interest in perhaps 3 women, and look how the first 2 ended. You, however, when he looks at you, it's different. There's regard there. Real regard." Kit didn't know how to respond to that. Before she could formulate a reply, the musicale was announced. Guests began moving toward chairs, arranged facing a raised platform where the musicians waited. Tristan materialized at Kit's side, offering his arm. "Shall we?" His voice was low, meant only for her. "I've secured us excellent seats, close enough to appreciate the music, far enough to whisper occasional commentary without disturbing our neighbors." They settled into chairs near the middle of the arrangement. The lights were dimmed, candles providing just enough illumination to see by, and the first notes of a sonata filled the air. Kit loved music. It was one of the few areas where she felt she had any real sensitivity, an ear for melody, an understanding of harmonic structure that came naturally, despite limited formal training. As the quartet played, she found herself drawn into the music, transported by the interweaving melodies. Beside her, Tristan leaned closer. His breath was warm against her ear as he whispered, "Beethoven, his Opus 18, number 4. Do you know it?" Kit nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The proximity of him, the faint scent of sandalwood, and something uniquely him, the solid presence beside her, was more intoxicating than any music. "The second movement is my favorite," he continued quietly. "The way the cello carries the melody, mournful and searching. It reminds me of—" he paused. "Of how I felt before I met you." Kit's breath caught. She turned to look at him and found his face closer than she'd realized, his dark eyes reflecting candlelight. In that moment, surrounded by music and shadow, the rest of the room seemed to fall away. "And now?" she whispered. "What does it remind you of now?" "Now it reminds me that mournful things can transform into something beautiful, that searching can end in finding." His voice was rough with emotion. "Kit, A sharp crack interrupted him. Lady Octavia Wren stood in the doorway, her entrance timed for maximum dramatic effect. The music faltered as every head turned toward her. Lady Octavia looked magnificent and terrible in equal measure. Her gown was blood-red silk that seemed to shimmer in the candlelight, her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken hours. But it was her expression that made Kit's blood run cold, pure calculated fury barely concealed beneath a veneer of gracious smile. "Lady Pemberton," Octavia said, her voice carrying clearly across the sudden silence. "Please forgive my tardiness. I was detained by the most distressing business." Her eyes swept the room, landing on Kit and Tristan with laser focus. "But I simply had to attend this evening. There are matters that require public address." Lady Pemberton rose, her expression troubled. "Lady Octavia, I wasn't expecting you this evening." "No, I imagine you weren't. But then, shocking revelations do have a way of demanding immediate attention, don't they?" Octavia moved further into the room, every eye following her. "Lady Catherine, how fortuitous to find you here. There's something I believe society should know, something that casts your recent activities in a rather different light." Kit felt ice form in her stomach. Beside her, Tristan had gone rigid, his hand moving to cover hers where it rested on the chair arm, a small gesture of solidarity and support. "Lady Octavia," Tristan's voice was cold, commanding, "this is neither the time nor the place for whatever grievance you imagine you hold." "Grievance?" Octavia's laugh was brittle. "Your Grace, this isn't about grievance, it's about truth, something Lady Catherine claims to value so highly, so let me share a truth with all of you." She turned to address the assembled guests, her voice ringing out clear and damning. "Miss Catherine Beaumont did not stumble upon information about my private affairs by accident. She sought it out deliberately, systematically, because she'd been obsessed with the Duke of Stormholt for months. She saw his engagement to me as an obstacle to be removed, and she craftily manufactured the entire scandal to achieve her aim. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kit felt the weight of dozens of eyes turning toward her, saw doubt and speculation cloud faces that had moments ago shown approval. "That's a lie," Kit said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her throat. "I overheard a conversation. I didn't seek anything out." "Is it? Then perhaps you can explain this." Octavia produced a folded letter from her reticule, holding it up like a weapon. "A letter written by you, Lady Catherine, to your cousin Miss Eleanor Harding, written 2 months before the Ashworth ball, in which you describe the Duke of Stormholt in rather passionate terms, in which you confess your infatuation and your determination to somehow make him notice you." Kit's mind raced. She had written to Eleanor, they corresponded regularly, but she tried to recall what she'd said in her letters. There had been one, she remembered with growing horror, where she'd mentioned the Duke, but only in passing, only to note that his engagement to Octavia seemed ill-suited, that Lady Octavia's character was questionable. Octavia unfolded the letter, her voice taking on a theatrical quality as she read, "The Duke of Stormholt deserves far better than Lady Octavia Wren. She's beautiful, certainly, but there's a coldness to her, a calculating nature that doesn't bode well for any man's happiness. If only he could see what she truly is. If only someone could make him understand what a mistake he's making." Octavia looked up, her smile triumphant. "Does that not suggest premeditation, Lady Catherine? Does that not indicate you were already planning to interfere?" "I never—" Kit's voice faltered. The words, torn from context, did sound damning. She had thought those things, had written them in a moment of frustration after watching Octavia treat a servant cruelly. But she'd never intended to act on them, never planned to interfere until that night when she'd overheard the actual betrayal. "Where did you get that letter?" Tristan's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "Private correspondence is not meant for public consumption, Lady Octavia. Your possession of it suggests theft or deception on your part. I received it from Miss Harding herself, who was disturbed by her cousin's fixation and felt duty-bound to reveal the truth." Octavia's expression was all false concern now. "Your Grace, I know this must be difficult to hear. I know you believed Lady Catherine acted from noble motives, but the evidence suggests otherwise. She's been manipulating you from the start, using your sense of honor against you to achieve her own ends." Kit felt the room spinning. This was exactly what she'd feared, that her impulsive honesty would be twisted, weaponized, used to destroy her. Helena had betrayed her correspondence. Impossible. Eleanor was her closest friend, the only family member who truly understood her. Unless— "My cousin would never willingly share my letters," Kit said, her voice stronger now. "What did you do to her, Lady Octavia? What threats did you make?" "Threats? My dear Lady Catherine, your paranoia is showing. Miss Harding simply felt obligated to reveal the truth." "Surely you don't suggest she's lying?" "I suggest," Tristan said, rising to his feet, "that you've taken words written in private, removed them from their context, and are attempting to construct a narrative that serves your wounded pride rather than any actual truth." He turned to address the gathered guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, I was there when Lady Catherine warned me about Lady Octavia's infidelity. I saw her genuine distress, her reluctance to involve herself. I witnessed with my own eyes the betrayal she described. Whatever private thoughts she may have recorded in a letter to her cousin have no bearing on the fundamental facts. Lady Octavia was unfaithful. Lady Catherine reported what she'd overheard, and I verified the truth of her claims. Nothing Lady Octavia has presented tonight changes those facts. But it does change the interpretation of those facts," Lady Winchester said thoughtfully from her seat. "If Lady Catherine had pre-existing interest in your Grace, then her actions could be seen as self-serving rather than purely honorable." Kit felt tears prick her eyes. This was it, the moment when society turned against her completely, when all the careful rebuilding of her reputation crumbled beneath Octavia's calculated assault. "Then allow me to clarify something," Tristan said, his voice ringing with authority. "I don't care what Lady Catherine's motivations were. Even if she did harbor some private interest in me, which, given that we'd never spoken before that night, seems remarkably unlikely, it doesn't change the fact that she told me the truth. Would you prefer she'd stayed silent? That I married a woman who was betraying me? That I entered a union based on lies and deception? But Your Grace, Lady Somerset ventured carefully. "If Lady Catherine was hoping to secure your attention for herself, then she succeeded," Tristan interrupted. "And I'm grateful for it." He turned to look at Kit, and there was something fierce and protective in his gaze. "Lady Catherine has shown me more genuine care, more honest regard, more true character in 3 weeks than I encountered in the entire duration of my engagement to Lady Octavia. If her warning came partially from personal interest, then I can only be thankful that her interest aligned with my well-being. But I don't believe that's what happened. I believe Lady Catherine acted from the principle she's demonstrated consistently since I've known her, an inability to tolerate injustice, even at personal cost." The room was silent now, everyone watching this unexpected drama unfold. Lady Octavia's triumph had faded into something closer to shock. "Furthermore," Tristan continued, his voice softening as he looked at Kit, "I should make clear to everyone present that my interest in Lady Catherine is entirely genuine and increasingly serious. Whatever assumptions Lady Octavia hoped to destroy with her revelations, she's only succeeded in making me more certain of my own feelings." Kit's breath stopped. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? Here, in front of all of society, was he declaring, "Your Grace," she whispered, "you don't have to." "Yes, I do." He took her hand, properly now, in full view of everyone. "Kit, I should have said this privately first, should have waited for a more appropriate moment. But Lady Octavia has forced my hand, and perhaps that's for the best. I'm tired of pretending that my interest in you is casual or uncertain. The truth is, I'm in love with you. Completely, impossibly, wonderingly in love with you. And I don't give a damn what anyone thinks about how or why we came together. All I care about is that we did." Gasps echoed through the room, but Kit barely heard them. All she could see was Tristan, the Duke of Stormholt, standing before her with his heart in his eyes, declaring his love in front of the entire upper echelon of London society. "Tristan," she breathed, using his given name without thinking. I love you too. I have for weeks now. I was just too frightened to say it, too certain that someone like me could never deserve someone like you." "Deserve?" His laugh was incredulous. "Kit, you saved me. Not just from a bad marriage, but from a life of going through motions without meaning. You made me feel things I'd forgotten how to feel. You made me laugh, made me think, made me want to be better. You're the extraordinary one, not me." Before Kit could respond, before she could process the impossibility and wonder of what was happening, Tristan did something utterly scandalous. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, right there in Lady Pemberton's drawing room, in front of everyone. The kiss was gentle but firm, claiming and cherishing all at once. Kit felt the world disappear into that single point of contact, felt years of loneliness and doubt melt away beneath the certainty of his touch. When they finally broke apart, the room erupted into chaos. Some guests were applauding, others murmuring in shock. Lady Thornbury was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, and Lady Octavia stood frozen, her carefully constructed revenge crumbling into ruin, as she realized she'd only succeeded in pushing Tristan and Kit together rather than driving them apart. Lady Pemberton rose, and something that might have been a smile played at her lips. "Well, I believe that concludes the evening's entertainment. Lady Octavia, I think it's time you departed. And your Grace, Lady Catherine, I suggest you remove to somewhere more private before you cause every maiden in London to swoon from the romance of it all." Tristan inclined his head to the Duchess, then turned to Kit. "Shall we?" Kit, her mind still spinning, could only nod. They made their way toward the door, every eye following them. Lady Octavia remained where she stood, her beautiful face twisted with impotent rage. As they passed her, Kit paused. She should feel triumphant, should relish this moment of victory. Instead, she felt only pity for the woman who'd sacrificed everything, honor, dignity, potential happiness, in pursuit of a title and wealth. "I'm sorry, Lady Octavia," Kit said quietly, meaning it. "I'm sorry that you couldn't see that genuine love is worth more than any amount of status or fortune. I hope someday you find what you're truly looking for." Octavia's eyes widened with fury, but before she could respond, Tristan was guiding Kit away out into the cool night air, leaving the scandal and whispers behind them. On the street, Lady Thornbury's carriage waited. The elderly woman emerged from the townhouse moments later, her eyes twinkling. "Well, dear boy, that was quite the spectacle. Your mother would have been horrified." "My mother," Tristan said dryly, "would have insisted I do things properly, wait appropriate periods, follow every protocol, but I find I'm no longer interested in doing things the expected way." He turned to Kit, his expression serious now. "I meant what I said in there, every word. I love you, Kit Beaumont. I want to marry you, if you'll have me. I want to spend the rest of my life with someone who tells me the truth, who sees me as I actually am, who makes me believe that honest connection is possible in this world of careful lies." Kit felt tears slide down her cheeks. Happy tears this time. "Yes, oh yes, Tristan, I'll marry you. I'll spend every day of my life loving you and being honest with you and trying to deserve the extraordinary gift you've given me." "You already deserve it," he said firmly. "You always did." They stood there on the street, heedless of propriety or passing carriages, holding each other as if they could anchor themselves against the storms to come. And Kit knew, with absolute certainty, that no matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter how society reacted or what new schemes Lady Octavia might attempt, they would face it together. The spinster who'd never expected to be chosen and the duke who'd thought himself incapable of genuine love had found each other against all odds. And nothing in the world could shake the foundation they'd built on truth, courage, and the rarest of all treasures, honest, fearless love. 6 months later, St. George's Church in Hanover Square stood resplendent with spring flowers, every pew packed with London's elite, come to witness what had become the season's most anticipated event, the marriage of Tristan Redwyke, Duke of Stormholt, to Miss Catherine Beaumont. Kit stood in the vestry, her hands trembling slightly as Sarah made final adjustments to her wedding gown. Ivory silk with delicate Brussels lace, far more beautiful than anything she'd ever imagined wearing. Through the door, she could hear the murmur of hundreds of voices, the shuffling of feet, the expectant hum of a crowd waiting for ceremony to begin. "You look like a princess, miss," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd see the day, but here we are. You're about to become a duchess." A duchess. The word still felt impossible, even after months of engagement, months of wedding preparations, months of slowly adjusting to the reality of her new life. Kit caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back, elegant, composed, radiating a confidence she'd never possessed before. The door opened and her father entered, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Catherine, my dear girl, you're—" He cleared his throat gruffly. "Your mother's weeping in the front pew, half of joy, half of disbelief that we've managed to marry you to a duke." Kit managed a shaky laugh. "I'm in a state of disbelief myself, father." "Don't be." He took her hands, his grip firm and warm. "You deserve this, Catherine. Every happiness, every blessing. You were brave when it mattered, honest when it cost you, and kind even to those who didn't deserve it. The Duke of Stormholt is a fortunate man to have won your heart." The music changed, the signal. Kit's pulse quickened as her father offered his arm. Ready? Was she? Ready to walk down that aisle, to pledge herself to Tristan before hundreds of witnesses, to step into a life so vastly different from anything she'd known? The old Kit, the one who'd hidden in shadows and expected nothing, would have been terrified. But she wasn't that Kit anymore. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm ready." The church doors opened, and Kit stepped into a vision of light and beauty. Every head turned, hundreds of faces watching as she began her procession down the aisle. She saw Lady Pemberton dabbing her eyes, Lady Thornbury beaming with undisguised satisfaction, even the Prince of Wales himself in attendance, nodding approval as she passed. But Kit saw only one person, Tristan standing at the altar in his formal attire, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. As she drew closer, she saw his expression soften, saw love and wonder and absolute certainty written across his features. Her father placed her hand in Tristan's, and the world narrowed to just the two of them. The ceremony passed in a blur of ritual and response. Kit spoke her vows in a clear voice, meaning every word, her eyes never leaving Tristan's. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, an emerald surrounded by diamonds, the stone matching her eyes, she felt tears prick her eyelids. "I love you," he whispered, too quiet for anyone else to hear. "And I you," she whispered back. The vicar pronounced them married, and Tristan kissed her with such tender passion that the church erupted into applause. Kit clung to him, this man who'd seen her when she was invisible, who'd chosen her when she was overlooked, who'd taught her that extraordinary things could happen to ordinary women brave enough to speak truth. They processed back down the aisle as husband and wife, the Duke and Duchess of Stormholt, and Kit felt as if she were floating. Outside, a crowd had gathered to cheer, and servants threw rose petals that rained down like blessings. The wedding breakfast at Stormholt House was a magnificent affair. The Duke's London residence was a palace of marble and gilt, rooms filled with rare art and priceless furnishings. Kit had visited many times during their courtship, but today it struck her anew. This was her home now. She was the mistress of all this, the Duchess of Stormholt. The thought was overwhelming. Tristan must have sensed her momentary panic, because he leaned close during the first course and murmured, "You're not alone in this, Kit. We'll navigate everything together, I promise." She squeezed his hand beneath the table, grateful beyond words. The toasts began. The Duke of Rothermere spoke of Tristan's character and integrity, praised Kit's courage and honesty. Lady Thornbury gave a surprisingly emotional speech about how love could find even the most guarded hearts, if those hearts were brave enough to be vulnerable. Kit's father stumbled through a toast that ended with him openly weeping, much to her mother's mortification and Kit's tender amusement. And then, unexpectedly, Lady Pemberton rose. The Duchess commanded immediate silence, her presence alone ensuring every ear was attentive. "I've hosted society for 30 years, she began, her voice carrying easily across the room. "I've seen countless matches made, some wise, some foolish, most somewhere in between. But I've rarely witnessed a union that restored my faith in the possibility of genuine affection within our circles." She turned to look at Kit and Tristan. "What you two have built on honest foundation, on courage and authentic regard rather than convenience and calculation, that's what marriage should be. You've reminded us that true partnership is worth far more than strategic alliance. May your union be blessed with many years of happiness, many children to carry forward your combined integrity, and may you never lose sight of the qualities that brought you together, truth, bravery, and the rarest sort of love, the kind that sees and cherishes the real person beneath society's masks." The room erupted in applause. Kit felt tears stream down her face, no longer caring about composure or appearance. This was real. This love, this marriage, this impossible, wonderful new life, all of it was gloriously, terrifyingly real. The weeks following the wedding passed in a whirlwind of adjustment. Kit threw herself into learning her new responsibilities, managing Stormholt House, overseeing the staff, hosting dinners and small gatherings. Tristan was patient and supportive, never making her feel inadequate despite her inexperience. But it was in the private moments, the evenings spent in the drawing room discussing their days, the mornings riding together in the park before the fashionable hour, the nights discovering each other in their marriage bed, that Kit felt most at home. With Tristan she could be completely herself, opinionated, curious, occasionally irreverent, always honest. "I had a letter from Eleanor today," Kit mentioned one evening as they sat in their private sitting room, a fire crackling cheerfully in the grate. "She's mortified about Lady Octavia manipulating her into providing that letter. Apparently Octavia told her I'd given permission for it to be shared as part of some elaborate surprise for you. Eleanor's been inconsolable." Tristan set aside the estate report he'd been reviewing. "Will you forgive her?" "I already have. Eleanor's trusting to a fault. It's what I love about her, even if it sometimes leads to disaster. Besides," Kit smiled slightly, "Lady Octavia's scheme failed rather spectacularly. If anything, Eleanor inadvertently helped us by forcing your public declaration." "Speaking of Lady Octavia," Tristan said carefully, "I heard she's left London, gone to the continent apparently. Her reputation never recovered from that night at Lady Pemberton's." Kit felt a pang of sympathy despite everything. "I hope she finds peace truly. Her life was driven by such empty pursuits, status, wealth, admiration, but never genuine connection. That's its own kind of prison. You're remarkably compassionate towards someone who tried to destroy you, perhaps. But I also understand her in a way. We both wanted something we thought we couldn't have. The difference is I was willing to risk rejection for honesty, while she tried to secure what she wanted through deception. I just happened to be luckier." Tristan moved to sit beside her, taking her hand in his. "Not luck, Kit. Choice. You chose courage over safety, truth over convenience. That's not luck. It's character." Kit leaned against his shoulder, marveling at the comfort of simply being near him. "Do you know what I was thinking during the wedding, while I was walking down that aisle?" "Tell me." "I was thinking about all the years I spent believing I wasn't enough. Wasn't pretty enough, wasn't accomplished enough, wasn't interesting enough to deserve love. And then I met you, and you looked at me and saw everything. Saw the person I'd been hiding because I thought she wasn't valuable. You made me believe I was worth loving, Tristan. That's the greatest gift anyone's ever given me." His arm tightened around her. "Kit, you were always worth loving. Always extraordinary, even when you couldn't see it. I didn't make you valuable. I just had the extraordinary fortune to recognize what was already there." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire casting dancing shadows across the room. Finally, Kit said, "I received another letter today, from the children's charity. They're asking if I'd consider becoming their patron now that I'm, well, a duchess. Will you accept?" "I'd like to." "Is that appropriate? Will people think it strange for a duchess to involve herself so directly in charitable work?" Tristan laughed softly. "My love, you exposed an unfaithful fiancé in the middle of a society ball, and then I kissed you in front of half of London's elite at a musical soirée. I think society's expectations of appropriate behavior sailed quite thoroughly out the window months ago. Besides," he turned her face gently toward his, "you're the Duchess of Stormholt now. You help define what's appropriate. If you want to be involved in charity, then that becomes the model for other noble ladies to follow." Kit felt a thrill of possibility. She could do good in this new role, could use her position to help others, could make her title mean something beyond social standing. "Then yes, I'll accept their offer. And Tristan, I've been thinking about other ways we might help. The working conditions in some of the factories, the lack of proper housing for laborers. Are you about to propose we become reformers, Your Grace?" His tone was amused but interested. "Would that be terrible?" "Not terrible at all. Challenging, certainly. We'll face opposition from those who profit from current conditions, but I've learned that doing what's right often means facing opposition. And having you beside me," he kissed her forehead gently, "having you beside me makes me brave enough to try." 6 months into their marriage, on a crisp November afternoon, Kit stood in the nursery at Stormholt Manor, their country estate, watching workmen install shelving and paint the walls a soft primrose yellow. Her hand rested unconsciously on her abdomen, where their child grew, still too small to show, but infinitely precious. She hadn't told Tristan yet. The physician had confirmed it only yesterday, and Kit wanted the moment to be perfect when she shared the news. A child, their child. The thought filled her with wonder and joy, and a touch of anxiety about what kind of mother she'd be. "Admiring your handiwork?" Tristan's voice came from the doorway. Kit turned, smiling at the sight of him, wind-blown from his morning ride, his expression softening as he looked at her. "Imagining, actually, what it will be like when this room is filled with toys and laughter and chaos." He crossed to stand beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Are you hinting at something, Duchess?" Kit bit her lip, unable to contain her smile any longer. "Tristan, we're going to have a baby. Come summer, you'll be a father." For a moment, he simply stared at her, processing the information. Then his face broke into the most beautiful smile she'd ever seen, pure joy, wonder, and overwhelming love all at once. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Kit, I don't have words. I'm so happy. So incredibly, impossibly happy." She laughed, tears streaming down her face. "So am I. Terrified, but happy. We'll manage the terror together." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "You're going to be an extraordinary mother, kind, honest, brave, everything I'd want our child to learn. And they'll have you to teach them strength, integrity, and how to see past society's facades to the real person beneath." They stood there in the empty nursery, holding each other and imagining the future, a future they'd build together, based on the same foundation of truth and courage that had brought them together. The following summer arrived with unusual warmth, and Stormholt Manor's gardens blazed with roses and lavender. Kit's pregnancy had progressed beautifully, though the last months had been uncomfortable. But now, in the early hours of a June morning, as dawn light streamed through the windows of the ducal bedroom, Kit held their son for the first time. He was perfect. Dark hair like his father, but with Kit's hazel eyes and stubborn chin. Tiny fists waved in the air as he made small sounds of newborn confusion at finding himself suddenly in the world. "Edward," Tristan said softly, touching one miniature hand with reverent gentleness. "Edward Tristan Redwyke, future Duke of Stormholt, though we'll call him Ned, I think, so he can be a child before he has to be a duke." "Ned," Kit repeated, her voice hoarse from labor, but filled with love. "Hello, little Ned. Welcome to the world." The baby's eyes, unfocused but already alert, seemed to find her face. Kit felt her heart expand with a love so fierce and protective it took her breath away. This was her son, hers and Tristan's, the physical proof of their impossible love story. Lady Thornbury bustled in, followed by Kit's mother, both women eager to meet the newest member of the family. As they cooed over baby Ned, as Tristan's hand remained entwined with Kit's, as the morning sun painted everything golden, Kit found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her here. A year and a half ago, she'd been the invisible spinster, standing in the shadows of a ballroom, expecting nothing, hoping for nothing beyond surviving another failed season. The idea that she'd end up married to a duke, deeply loved, holding their son, it would have seemed like the most impossible fantasy. But she'd taken a chance. She'd spoken truth when silence would have been safer. She'd been brave when wisdom suggested caution. And somehow, impossibly, that courage had led her here, to this perfect moment, this perfect family, this perfect love. "What are you thinking about?" Tristan asked softly, noticing her thoughtful expression. Kit looked up at her husband, the man who'd seen her when she was invisible, chosen her when she was overlooked, loved her when she was certain she was unlovable. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am that I didn't stay silent that night. How grateful I am that I had the courage to whisper the truth, even knowing it might cost me everything. As am I." He leaned down to kiss her forehead, careful not to disturb the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Your courage changed everything, Kit. For both of us." "No," Kit said gently. "Truth changed everything. Courage was just how I delivered it." Years later. The gardens of Stormholt Manor were filled with laughter on a golden August afternoon. Ned, now 5 years old, chased his younger sisters. Catherine, called Kate and Eleanor, through the roses while their parents watched from beneath a spreading oak tree. Kit sat on a blanket, her hand resting comfortably in Tristan's, watching their children play. They'd been married for 6 years now, and life had settled into a rhythm of comfortable joy. The Ton had long since accepted Kit as one of their own. Her charity work had made her genuinely popular, her honesty refreshing in a world of careful pretense. "Do you know what I realized today?" Kit said thoughtfully. "It's been 6 years since the Ashworth Ball. 6 years since I did the most impulsive, terrifying thing I'd ever done, and changed both our lives forever." Tristan smiled, watching Ned attempt to teach Kate how to properly examine a flower. "Have you ever regretted it? Even for a moment?" "Never. Not once." Kit leaned against his shoulder, utterly content. "Even when things were difficult. Even when Lady Octavia tried to destroy me. Even when I was terrified I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I never regretted choosing truth, because truth led me to you, and I to you." He kissed the top of her head, a gesture of casual affection that still made her heart flutter. "I love you, Kit Redwyke, more today than yesterday, though I'd have sworn that impossible. And I love you, always and forever, Your Grace." Ned came running over, his face flushed with exercise and joy. "Mama, Papa, come see the butterfly Kate and I found. It's enormous and blue, and Eleanor says it's a fairy, but I told her that's silly. Fairies aren't real, but come look anyway." Kit allowed herself to be pulled to her feet, Tristan rising beside her. Together they followed their children deeper into the garden, their hands still linked, their family complete and happy and utterly real. And as Kit watched her son point excitedly at the butterfly, heard her daughter's delighted squeals, felt Tristan's solid presence beside her, she thought about all the women who stayed silent, all the people who let injustice pass unchallenged, because speaking up seemed too dangerous, too costly, too unlikely to matter. She hoped somehow that her story might encourage them, that they might know that courage, real courage, the kind that trembled and doubted but acted anyway, could change everything. That truth, however difficult to speak, was always worth the risk. That love, genuine and honest love, was possible even in the most unlikely circumstances. The spinster from the shadows had become a duchess, yes, but more importantly, she'd become exactly who she was always meant to be, a woman who spoke truth, acted with courage, and loved without reservation. A woman who'd whispered a warning to a duke and found, against all odds, the life she'd always deserved. And as the afternoon sun painted everything golden and her family's laughter filled the air, Kit knew with absolute certainty every risk had been worth it. Every moment of fear, every threat, every challenge, all of it had been worth it to arrive at this perfect, impossible, wonderful life. The Duke of Stormholt pulled his Duchess close, and together they stood beneath the oak tree, watching their children play and marveling at the extraordinary gift they'd been given. Each other, their family, and a love built on the strongest foundation of all, unwavering, fearless truth. Epilogue. For those who wonder. For the listeners who've journeyed with Kit and Tristan from that first whispered warning to this moment of complete happiness, perhaps you're wondering what became of the others in this story. Lady Octavia Wren never returned to London society. She eventually married a wealthy Italian count and settled in Florence, where distance and time softened the sharp edges of her bitterness. In her later years, she became known for her patronage of young artists, perhaps finding in their creativity the passion that had always eluded her in pursuit of status. Lord Jasper Loxley fled to America after the scandal, where reports suggested he made a modest fortune in railway investments, and eventually married a merchant's daughter. He was said to be reasonably happy, having finally learned that genuine affection was worth more than aristocratic connections. Eleanor Harding, Kit's cousin, became a regular visitor to Stormholt Manor, and formed a deep friendship with Tristan's younger brother, eventually leading to their own happy marriage. She never quite forgave herself for her unwitting role in Lady Octavia's scheme, but Kit's complete forgiveness helped heal those wounds. Lady Thornbury lived to see all three of her grandnieces and nephews grow to adulthood, and remained the sharp-tongued, warm-hearted force of nature she'd always been. She claimed, loudly and to anyone who'd listen, that she'd known from the moment she met Kit that her nephew had finally found his match. As for Kit and Tristan, their love deepened with each passing year. They became known throughout England not just for their wealth and title, but for their integrity, their charitable work, and their genuine partnership. Their three children grew up in a house filled with laughter, honesty, and the certain knowledge that they were deeply loved. Kit never lost her habit of speaking truth to power. The difference was that now, as the Duchess of Stormholt, her voice carried weight and influence. She used both to champion causes that mattered: better conditions for workers, education for poor children, reform of laws that treated women as property rather than persons. And Tristan, who'd once thought himself incapable of genuine connection, learned that love required not just finding the right person, but being brave enough to be fully known. In Kit, he'd found both, the right person and the courage to be completely himself. Their story became something of a legend in London society, the tale of the spinster who whispered a warning to a duke and changed both their lives forever. It was told at dinner parties and in drawing rooms, embellished and romanticized with each retelling. But those who truly knew Kit and Tristan understood that the real story was simpler and more powerful than any gossip could capture. Two lonely people had the courage to be honest with each other, and that courage, that honesty, that willingness to be vulnerable and real, those were the ingredients of a love story that lasted a lifetime. For those listeners facing their own moments of doubt, their own choices between safety and truth, between silence and courage, may Kit's story remind you that speaking the truth, however difficult, however costly, can change everything. That love worth having is built on genuine foundation. That being seen for who you really are is worth any risk. And that sometimes, just sometimes, the courage to whisper a truth in the darkness can lead to a lifetime of light. May you find your own courage when it matters most. May you speak your truth when silence seems safer. And may you discover, as Kit did, that the life you build on honesty and bravery is worth every moment of fear it takes to get there. The Duke and Duchess of Stormholt lived long, happy lives, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and the certain knowledge that they'd found something rare and precious. A love story built to last, founded on the strongest things in the world: truth, courage, and the willingness to truly see and be seen. And that, dear listeners, is a happiness worth wishing for everyone. The end. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional journey through betrayal, bravery, and a love that defied every expectation. We hope this story touched your heart as deeply as it touched ours. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment, and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support from the bottom of our hearts helps us stay inspired to keep bringing you more unforgettable stories of love, redemption, and unexpected twists. At the end of this video, you'll see a new story suggestion. Click to discover another emotional tale that will surprise you just as much as this one. Thank you for being here, the Legends of the Fall team.